We have found that a lot of the people we work with have been living in survival mode for a really long time. And getting out of that can feel scary. You don't know what tools to do to get your business or your personal life out of survival mode. Today's podcast is really going to be helpful for you because we have some techniques to help you get off that treadmill and to land on better ground with solid footing. We can't wait to have you listen today.
Welcome to the Grounding and Growing Leadership Podcast, where everyone is a leader and leadership starts with you. I'm Tara.
And I'm Pamela.
Thank you for listening and inviting us along on your leadership journey. Hi, Pamela. Great to see you.
It's so good to see you, Tara. So excited today for our podcast topic. And I think this is going to be really helpful for people as they look into their season of life right now.
Yeah. Last week, I was at a local networking event and ended up in a conversation with a group of women who are professionals. A couple different organizations may be represented in that group. And over time, the conversation kind of naturally led to people feeling overextended, maybe some unrealistic expectations from their employer. Then the conversation went to just the level of stress that everyone was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was asking, just being curious and asking questions and interacting, I asked them, do you all feel like you're in survival mode? And they're like, yes, we never got out of it from the pandemic. We're still in survival mode. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry, because actually we as humans and as businesses are not meant to live in survival mode. But unfortunately, a lot of us, either as individuals or as businesses, stay stuck there. And I thought it would be really good for us to talk today about what happens when we live in survival mode as people and as businesses. And I'm sure you see this in the work you do too.
Yeah. And ironically, I've been having a lot of these conversations as well. We can link to this in the show notes, but I just came out with something called a soul care journal. And so it's led to a lot of different conversations, several different people that have commented, yeah, I've always wanted to be a journaler, but I just, nobody's got time for that. Really coming at it from the aspect of just another to-do to add to our list. But what's really interesting about the power of journaling, and especially about the power of attending to what you really need, is you actually see what's going on within you when you write it down. And it's very much a therapeutic tool to be able to release the things that are inside of you. I love this topic today because we can't not pay attention to it. Otherwise, it's going to attend to us. And so this is why this is such an important topic.
What do you mean it will attend to us?
It will hijack us. If we don't recognize our busyness, if we don't recognize that our bodies, our minds, our spirits may be constantly living in fight or flight, and we don't ever come down and rest, we will end up crashing. Like what happens when we don't allow our parasympathetic nervous system to help us digest our food. We get refreshed when we rest. It's when we're in that state of allowing our sleep patterns to actually serve us. If we don't allow that, we don't sleep well because we're waking up in the middle of the night with constant anxiety. If after that noon lunchtime, when you typically have a little bit of a lull, you're feeling a little sleepy and maybe not as productive, it's because your body is starting to settle in and rest. But what we do is we grab that next cup of coffee, we go right into that next meeting, we force ourselves to stay present, and we have these coping mechanisms to be able to do it. And then we work through our day, we get home and we're on and making dinner or going to the kids' games or getting the kids set for bed and all of it. And none of it involves a restful part of our routine. We may work until midnight. We get up at 5 a.m. to start the next day, and we're still on the spinning wheel. So we cannot do that long term. Many people do that 7 days a week, and it will take its toll on our mental health, on our physical health, on our overall quality of life.
Yeah, my heart rate went up when you were talking about that. I was like starting to breathe faster and felt my heart rate go up. So let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
Let's back up a little bit, and then we'll come back to what happens in our body, because I think I'm sure there are people listening whose heart rate also went up when you were talking about just the treadmill of life. And we're women who also are caretakers. You're caring for your mom. I'm caring for little kids. And there's a lot on our plates, along with business ownership and running the business and
Yeah.
having friendships. So that's just part of life. But then there's also this extra layer of being in quote unquote survival mode,
Mm-hmm.
which is when we either as individuals or maybe as a team or as a company perceive that we're in crisis
Yeah.
and have to go like kick into another gear.
Yeah. And we get a high of adrenaline that helps us when we're in true crisis mode. It allows us to be able to function at a higher level. But if you look at the lives of first responders, they have significant amount of breaks. They're never meant to stay there because they arrive on a scene, they're able to assess, they work really fast at being able to calm down a situation, but they don't constantly live in that space of showing up in high adrenaline. They then pass off all of those people that they help at high capacity for the times that they're there. Then they go on to the hospital where they are cared for. They don't continue in that constant state of caring for people in crisis. And so what down?
Yeah, I think some of us, either again, individually or as a business, were in survival mode before the pandemic hit, just
Yep.
individual circumstances. I've worked in organizations where there was constantly an emergency. It was always important. There were no priorities because everything was a priority.
Mm.
So some cultures are just built like that of when someone says jump, everyone figures out how to jump.
Mhm.
And then the pandemic hit. And then there was what I would say there really was a crisis for a lot of us. We would not have survived if we hadn't kicked into that gear,
Mhm.
if we hadn't figured that out. First of all, let's talk about how do you know if you're in survival mode? Because I think some of us are so used to, you said some people are living that 24/7. Maybe they don't even realize they are in survival mode. So, what are some of the clues?
If you're having a hard time experiencing joy from life, if you detach from relationships, if you sleep and you don't feel rested when you wake up, if you're forgetting a lot of things, if you forget to take care of your basic needs, if everyone else is a priority except for you, you can find that your emotional regulation has really gone out of the window. You're angry probably a lot, which anger is a secondary emotion to fear. And sometimes that fear underneath is, I'm going to stay here forever. And you don't know how to deal with it. And so you develop these unhealthy coping mechanisms. And we all saw in the pandemic that some people did slow down and create some things with their hands. A lot of carbs were consumed. And so those were coping mechanisms. A lot of Netflix, a lot of binging. But when people started in that mode, I think for the initial first several weeks where we heard about what was going on constantly in our days. This is another thing that happens is that we were living in fight or flight or freeze. Like I'm unable to look at all of this, or I have to watch everything that's going on constantly, or I want to run away from it. I currently live in Montana, and a lot of people tried to run away from what was happening and move
Right.
into
A lot of people went into flight.
a lot of people went into flight, and now they are living here. Welcome. And those are all stress responses. But again, we did see people who were noticing within themselves, within their mental health, within their relationships that I can't do this long term. And so, how do I develop a healthy rhythm to process through the fears, the emotions that are coming, the carbs that I'm consuming, the fact that I can't regulate with other people because we really help one another when I'm with someone and they're calm. And I am a counselor. And so I do meet with people in person and I have them come into my office. And if they walk in highly agitated or really stressed, when I calm my voice down, when I allow everything to slow down, it usually takes between 15 to 20 minutes for that person to start mirroring my calm.
Mm.
But when you don't have another person like that, or if your office is constantly in a state of crisis and people are speeding around and there isn't anyone else that brings that peace to you, you don't get to have that person mirror and help you to regulate your emotions. And it may be something very unconscious, subconscious, but you do that for one another. And you can be the person that does that for someone else in the office.
Mm. And I think I want to go back to the point we made at the beginning, which is we are not intended, our bodies, our psyche, our emotional well-being was never intended to live in fight or flight.
Yeah.
And so even as an organization, it's hard to know if you are in fight or flight, if you're in that survival mode and are stuck there. And hear me, if you are listening and you are in the hospitality industry, restaurant industry, healthcare industry, and I know there are others, but those are the kind of three that come to mind. Like that fight or flight was real. Like it's not just even imagine there are businesses that didn't make it.
Yeah.
There are people that didn't make it and you were having to work with them and serve them. And so that level of crisis is real.
Yes.
And sometimes it's hard to come out of survival mode. So it's hard to know when it's safe to come out of survival mode. And we believe because we worked so hard and we did it, we made it through. We made it through that really hard thing. And look, other people are falling away, but we ran the race and we crossed, I don't want to say a finish line, but we're still running. Maybe we're jogging, maybe we're limping. And we, I think, start to tell ourselves that this is how it has to be, or that the only way to keep going is to live in this place of survival. That's the only way you know how to succeed is to survive. And there is danger in that belief. It is a myth. Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit today about that myth. There's a study done in the redwood forests where they took some redwoods and they shot them with the same adrenaline that kind of happens. Maybe it's cortisol, I'm not sure. But they shot them with adrenaline so that the trees didn't go into hibernation. And these redwoods, which normally live centuries, died within a year or two.
Wow.
Because they didn't go into hibernation. So the problem I think that happens with survival mode is that it's a short game. Mm-hmm. And you can only play the short game so long as a person, as a human, and as an organization before we start to pay dear costs, real costs to ourselves and to our businesses.
And I think we've seen this with some people is that we start to lose hope that things are ever going to change. And when we become hopeless, meaning tomorrow is going to be exactly the same as today, we truly start to suffer. So that happens and it impacts us first individually, but then that overflow goes into our family. That overflow goes into the people that we work with. Eventually, we do lose our ability to be creative. We can't produce at that level. And I heard someone give a really good definition of what suffering is. It is having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have. I'll say that again.
Yeah.
Suffering is having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have. So that can be a physical ailment. That can be suffering because a relationship doesn't have that good communication that you were really wanting to have in your marriage or in a friendship or within your family. It can be what's happening to your business, that there are things that are happening globally and within the economy. You're having to respond, but oftentimes in this survival mode, we're reacting. And that constant state of reacting is, I don't want this. We hear a lot of people say, I just want to go back to normal. In this space that we are in as a world, as humanity right now, that has shifted. And the way for us to move forward and out of this is, what is the rhythm for my life to not just survive, but to thrive in this season that I'm in personally, in the season that my family's in, that the kids are in, that our business is in. And if I can't slow down to even know what I really want and can move toward, I will stay in that state of suffering and hopelessness. So in that space, it becomes really hard to not constantly live in a state of blaming what's happening in the world, blaming other people in other industries, blaming that no one's seeing me, that I'm dying here, or that our business wasn't able to maintain. But I want to break apart that word responsibility to you and to recognize that we have an ability to respond and to move our focus from blaming everyone and being in a place of a victim, and to start to understand that I can move forward as a victor out of this when I have the ability to respond. And when I recognize I have an ability to respond, I start to see hope. I become hopeful again that there's something that I can grow, whether it's the business that I currently have or something new, relationally, individually. If I stay in a state of blaming, I will always be a victim. I will burn out and I will need other people to care for me. Today, you can choose to start to do some things that you recognize I'm going to stop blaming. And if that's one thing that you do from today's podcast, you are going to be so far ahead in just your ability to clear out those negative thoughts from your brain, to start dreaming again. Own what you need to own. Stop blaming whoever for the place that you are at. And then start, I'm going to say, journaling out what it is that you have the ability to respond to, the ability to dream about. You've been given tremendous abilities, and we need you to live fully into them. Humanity needs you and your abilities. You're going to be shut down if you stay in blaming mode, in victim mode. But we're excited for you to rise up into that ability, that response ability, to be able to move forward with us.
I think you said some really important things. I have a good friend, and something we do for each other often when either of us is feeling stuck, we remind each other that we have choices.
Yeah.
You're not stuck. You have choices.
Yeah.
And those choices might include something that's hard.
Yep.
It might include risking to lose something that feels important, but you do have a choice.
Yeah.
And I do think this has a lot to do with recognizing the choices that are in front of you, and then making a decision and committing to a choice that looks different than the way you've been operating. So as a business, some of the symptoms that you're living in survival mode as a business is that there isn't a priority. There are 50 priorities, and they change or shift every day.
Yeah.
We are constantly in react mode. So we're constantly just reacting to what's happening to us, as opposed to really thinking about pausing and responding to the outside pressures that are coming in.
Okay.
The other thing that you'll see, you were just talking about it before, Pamela, but you'll also see blame and shame happening internally within the culture. This is where we end up probably having either departments or people who have different roles blaming each other for the stress that we experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that all speaks to a culture that's probably living in survival mode. It leads to people not trusting one another, and it breaks down culture very quickly. So what happens is you maybe decide as a business, we're going to get out of the survival mode. And the problem is it takes time. I've seen people pull together for a short-term crisis, and they can move right out of it back into normal if they don't have to live there. But once you've lived there and people have begun to believe that this is the way it is, this is our culture now,
Right.
it takes time to shift that back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes leadership to decide we are going to start to do some things differently. And probably it starts with some frameworks around prioritization, clarity, communication, and investing some time in people and culture.
And being realistic as well, where people perhaps moved as teams, as individuals within the culture of the work dynamic that weren't healthy, that needed to fall away. And this crisis is actually helping you examine that. So that potentially could be that there are some positions that no longer should function as they are. That doesn't mean that person needs to be cut. It may mean that there needs to be some reorganization. There needs to be allocations in different places. And so again, this can bring up fear within the employers and the individuals, which tends to have people move toward blame and shame. However, I'm going to come back to people and say, is my identity, is my security based on this specific position, doing this specific role for the rest of my life? Or could this be an invitation for you to do more grounding work to understand the value that you bring as an employee when you are in the right fit, in the right place, in the culture, and you can also continue to grow yourself so that this might be a chance to reinvent what you can possibly do and do something that you've always wanted to do, but didn't have the opportunity to do. So it's also going to highlight where we need to prune some things away and highlight where we actually get to grow into something that's even more creative, more of a fit, more exciting for us in the long run.
Hey everyone, this is Tara. You know how some podcasts will pause in the middle to give you an advertisement or a word from their sponsors? Well, we don't have sponsors, but we do have an important opportunity that we want to share with you. Listen, I think that you and I can agree that the old school top-down leadership model just doesn't work anymore. It would be nice if it did because it is easier to just command and have people pay attention. But honestly, people don't work that way because relationships don't work that way and leadership no longer works that way. And so we have developed a program called Grounded Leadership. And we are seeing incredible results with the cohorts that we're currently running. From emerging and new leaders to executives and business owners, leaders at every level are growing and grounding in their leadership through this program. Grounded Leadership is a comprehensive practice that ensures emotional maturity while encouraging individual growth and building thriving teams. Listen, titles are about authority, but they don't really influence change. Our leadership practice is what determines our ability to influence others. This journey is ideal for all leaders who are ready to maximize their potential, take responsibility for their influence. We have a cohort starting in January of 2024. It's going to be a mixed cohort of leaders from across the country from different organizations, and we really think that you would enjoy it. Not only that, we think you would find high value and there would be a really high ROI for you, your leadership, and your team. If this is at all of interest to you, please reach out. In the show notes, we're going to have a PDF that you can click and see all the program details, but also you could email me, tara@aligntransform.com, schedule a quick 15 to 30 minute consult to get some of your questions answered, and we can determine if this is a program that's a fit for you and if you're a fit for the program. If this is of interest to you, we hope to hear from you. And now back to the podcast.
Yeah, it really is a shift in mindset. So that fixed mindset where what I know is what is safe, what I know and what I'm good at is what I have to remain in.
Yeah.
That keeps us stuck. That fixed mindset keeps us stuck. And so if our fixed mindset happens to be in this victim mentality, it keeps us stuck in survival mode because the victim mentality only knows how to live there. And we have to shift out of that mentality. But I have to tell you, you will not be able to make that shift if you don't take a break, if you don't take a rest, if you don't get a breather. And so I see people sometimes leaving organizations because maybe the organization is shifting, but they have lived in survival mode so long, they don't know how to rest in that culture. And they've felt a need to completely change their environment in order to live differently or in order to show up differently. If you're choosing to stay in the organization while that shift is made, you can be part of helping that change come to fruition. But it takes some intention and setting some boundaries. And we have an episode about boundaries. We won't go too deep there, but setting some boundaries around what you will and won't jump to do, what you will and won't kill yourself or bend over backwards to do. And sometimes the organization doesn't thank you for it. And so that's also something that's hard is you might choose to live different, but because the organization is still in survival mode, they may not value that if that's something you're choosing.
Yeah, they may not, but it's really important for you to recognize that you cannot go on empty for very long. If we're going to talk about our physical, our mental, our emotional, our relational wellness, we cannot live on empty because we will eventually crash and burn. And I'm going to say, is a job worth that? And your ability to communicate and say, I need to step away to give myself some care. And you need to hear this from me right now. is that self-care is not selfish. Self-compassion and kindness to yourself is what we talk a lot about, how we want humanity to live, but oftentimes we talk about it in regards to other people. I will do this for other people. It's important that we're kind, and we teach this to our kids, but we do not know how to receive that for ourselves. We feel that if we have a need, or if we tell others, if we tell even ourselves that we have a need, that all of a sudden we appear that we are needy, and then we appear that we are weak. And I need to tell you that you are not needy or weak. You are human, and you need to have some tools to put some gas in your tank that looks like wellness, that wellness in several different areas. Your spiritual wellness, explore and look for reasons that you feel excited again, that you feel connected to your soul within. Your physical wellness, by having active rest, meaning that it's something that you're doing during the day, you're deep breathing, you're stretching, you're going for walks during the day, you're drinking a lot of water, and then also passive rest, where you are really getting good sleep. You're getting into that REM sleep where your body's actually being rejuvenated, that you actually take care of yourself intellectually as well. That definitely is a place where we, as you said, Tara, we do need to grow. We can't stay in that fixed mindset that actually atrophies us, but to know that I have the opportunity to choose. Socially, we need other people in our lives. What is the movie with Tom Hanks where he ends up and he's on an island all on his own?
That was Wilson.
With Wilson.
Yes.
Castaway. Yeah, we see it over and over again. We cannot thrive in isolation. We need to have our people, and we need to take time away for that mirroring of someone else to do life with me and to enjoy life with me. So whether that's your friend group or your family or your spouse or your partner, whoever that is, your kids, we need to feel connected to other people. Emotionally, we need to understand that if we're experiencing ourselves as more angry or more sad or that exhaustion, our feelings are more heightened. Those feelings aren't always telling us the truth, but they are giving us information. And what is that information telling me, and how do I need to attend to that? Ultimately, when we do all of those things, we start to feel hope again. And then I get to either re-engage or stay engaged at work because I have decided to engage and take care of myself.
Yes. And if you're a business owner or a leader who's feeling burned out individually, that is the first step. You need to first get back to a place where you have some capacity,
yes,
and can breathe and can show up in a different way. And then you can lead your people. So it's the oxygen mask. You can't shift this in your organization if you aren't willing to shift it in your own life.
And you're modeling and showing the way.
Yes.
Everyone that's working with you is praying that you realize this.
Yes. If you are telling your people take a break, but you're working 80 hours.
Yeah.
They see that, they see it, and they recognize that in order to be successful in your organization, that's what it looks like, because you're their model of success in your organization as a leader. And so you have to recognize that, and you have to be willing to make some changes in your life first. And then as a business, the modeling of a healthy work life is important. Helping to manage expectations with people. If you have people who are burnt out or who are going to just bend over backwards to over deliver, you may need to impose some boundaries on them, and they might not like it.
Yeah, by saying, hey, we are for you, but right now, this is what it's like to be on the other side of you.
Mm.
And most likely they don't know that because they're in survival mode. So they have no ability to emotionally regulate. And they just think I've got to keep producing. I won't have value. What will the team do without me? So they have some soundtracks in their head that they are repeating that are not healthy. But for some reason, that's helping to keep them just go.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you have a larger team or work in an organization, it's the person who, why are they always crabby? Why are they always frustrated? Like you can feel the seething coming off of them. That resentment and bitterness comes from living in that survival mode for too long. And they may not welcome you to come in and point it out to them. But if you are their manager, I think having an open conversation to say, here is how people are experiencing you, that is not your intent. Your intent is to, based on what you know about them, they probably have a good intent to do good work or to help people. And their behavior is having a different kind of impact on the people around them. And they maybe don't know that. And for those of you listening, you might think, how could they not know? They are so in their head that it's very possible they truly are not aware. And we've talked about this many times, but only about 10 to 15% of the population is self-aware at any given time. And so most people are not aware of how they're being perceived.
It's caring to share that with that person. They may feel offended at first. But Tara, you and I just had an amazing workshop on feedback, giving and receiving feedback. And I think one of the big ahas for people, a takeaway, is that I actually want you to stay here. And if I didn't, I wouldn't tell you this and you would just be out the door. But because I care about you, I want to be able to give you this. We call it loving feedback, be a loving critic, because I actually really want you to stay, but you have a blind spot. And they're called blind spots for a reason, because we don't see them and it's affecting the people around the table. And for you leaders who have this whole team, believe me, they are waiting and hoping that you will have that conversation, because if you don't have that conversation with that toxic team member, they may be planning their exit strategy, because that team member affects the whole team, everyone around the table, way more than what you think. And so it's also not caring for your team if you withhold.
Yeah. And if you have that toxic team member, sometimes when we've been in survival mode, we've convinced ourselves that we need that person's skill set or ability, or even the fact that they're willing to put in so much time. We convince ourselves that we need that in order to just get our work done or survive as a team. But 9 times out of 10, when that toxic team member either changes or leaves, there's huge relief on the team itself. So the last thing I just want to say to leaders and business owners is, if your current system of operation, if the way that you operate currently looks or sounds like some of the things we've talked about today from a survival mode standpoint, it might be time to step back, take a step back. And whether you use a framework for planning and accountability or you rely on someone to come in and help you, it might be time to take a step back and reimagine how to operate the business. Because operating in survival mode, you are going to continue to get some of these really unfortunate results of high stress, burnout for yourself, for your people, lack of profitability because there's a lot of time wasted in stress.
Yes.
And then just it's slowing down your growth. So if you want to experience higher productivity, profitability, growth, stepping back and really thinking about, how do we look at this differently? How do we have a different strategy? I know people at organizations that have been acquired. I would love actually to hear from you if you've been a part of an acquisition that has kept culture intact. I don't know almost any acquisitions that has kept, because they care about the short game. They're all about the stakeholders and what this quarter's projections are going to look like, what this quarter's bottom line. And so a lot of people who work in those organizations end up feeling like they're in survival mode, because that's what every quarter is, survival mode around that. And so stepping back to ask yourself, is there a different way to do this? The long game leads to higher profitability over time. But switching from the short game to the long game is challenging, and it takes some intention, and it's not going to happen organically. So we just encourage you to think about, how can you step back and look at how 2024 could be different for you and your team than the way it is right now.
Yeah. And how you can put people first. When you do that, you're going to have higher loyalty, higher employee engagement. When people can take a step back to care for themselves, they ultimately will miss less work. They will have higher creativity, higher productivity. You will see that return on your investment, because people know themselves. They're excited to come. They show up at the table. I'm excited with who I'm working with. We're not all constantly amped up on whatever we need to be amped up, and then taking whatever we need to take to quote unquote sleep. When you do that, you don't even rest fully. What could it look like if you put people first in 2024? And what sort of exciting innovation is out there because you do?
If that sounds like a shift or a change you're hoping to make in the next year, in the next couple of months, even as we look at 2024, we'd love to support you. Reach out and let us know. And we have resources that might be helpful for you. And we'd love to hear what other questions or what other challenges you're experiencing in this area. We hear and see the challenges of survival mode, I would say almost every day in our work. And so we'd love to hear from you and hear about the experiences that you're having. And we'll keep looking for resources for you because we're here for you.
Thanks so much for being with us today. We look forward to having you join us next time for an important conversation on the Grounding and Growing Leadership Podcast.
Come on.